So the first night he crashed on my couch, I figured it was a one-time thing. He was drunk, had missed the last train home, and I was just being a good friend. But then, the next week, he borrowed my bed again, and the week after that. I'm not gonna lie, it got kind of weird how naturally it started happening, like my bedroom was some unofficial crash pad or something. Then, out of nowhere, he just stopped leaving. Okay, let me back up a bit because this sounds like the start of some rom-com, but it really wasn't planned like that. I met Jamie a few months ago at this dive bar downtown, where I usually go because it's cheap and the music's decent enough to ignore the bad dancing. He was there with some friends, but somehow ended up sitting next to me at the bar, nursing a beer and making these sarcastic comments about the playlist that made me laugh out loud, something I hadn't done in a while. We talked for hours that night, and I don't say that lightly. Time just slipped away. We had that weird, easy rapport where you can joke about your worst dating disasters without feeling judged. At some point, I mentioned that I lived alone in this tiny apartment a few blocks away, and before I knew it, he asked if he could come over just to chill a bit. He looked like he was on the verge of passing out right there, honestly. So, yeah, that was the first night. I put an extra blanket on the couch, figured I'd give him some space, and didn't think much of it. Next thing I know, he's texting me later that week saying his roommate kicked him out for a few days, and could he crash at my place again? That's when my brain started doing that little wait a minute alarm. I mean, I was fine with it at first, but there was something about the way he casually made my bed his own that made me wonder if this was just going to be a pattern. Jamie is the kind of guy who's effortlessly captivating, tall, with this messy brown hair that looks like he just ran his hands through it 1,000 times, and these eyes that somehow hold a little bit of mischief and sadness at the same time. He's got this charm that's low-key, but undeniable, like he's not trying to impress you but somehow does anyway. I found out he's a graphic designer, freelance mostly, which means his schedule is wild but flexible. Sometimes he disappears for a few days, and then just shows up with a six-pack or a weird, obscure movie he wants to watch. And my apartment, well, it's nothing fancy. Small, two-bedroom unit on the 3rd floor of this aging brick building, the kind of place where the pipes creak and the radiator clanks in the winter. I live close to work, so it's convenient, but not exactly a place you imagine turning into a love nest. Yet somehow, with Jamie around, it started feeling less like just my space and more like ours, even though we hadn't really said anything about it. So here's the thing. After that first month of borrowing my bed on and off, Jamie just stopped leaving. Not in a creepy way, more like he settled in as if he belonged. And I caught myself not minding it at all. I mean, how often does someone just come into your life, take your bed, and then your heart without so much as knocking? That's where I am now, trying to figure out whether this accidental roommate thing is some kind of disaster waiting to happen, or the best thing I never saw coming. And honestly, I have no idea what's next. But for the first time in a long time, I'm kind of okay with not knowing. What's funny is, I never imagined I'd be the kind of guy who'd just let someone move in without a formal, hey, do you want to be roommates conversation? But with Jamie, it just kind of happened. One day he was crashing after a night out, and the next, he was rifling through my kitchen cabinets like he lived there. It was subtle. He'd start leaving his stuff around, then it turned into little piles. Socks on the floor, a toothbrush on the bathroom sink, that kind of thing. It made me laugh more than it annoyed me, honestly. But that's when I started paying attention to the little things. Like how he'd make coffee in the morning and always pour me a cup without me asking. Or the way he'd mess around with the playlist on my stereo, swapping out my usual indie tracks for something more eclectic. He's got this weird habit of humming off key while he's cooking, which is both adorable and slightly terrifying because he's completely oblivious to it. One night, about 2 weeks after he basically moved in, we were sitting on the couch watching some documentary he'd insisted on watching. Something about deep-sea creatures. I wasn't really paying attention because I was half focused on my phone, but Jamie was so into it, pointing out weird facts and making dumb jokes. At some point, I glanced over and caught him looking at me instead of the screen. He smiled, his eyes catching the light from the TV, and just said, "Thanks for letting me stay here." I don't know why, but that simple sentence hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the bed or the place to crash. It was more like a quiet acknowledgement that I'd become something more than just a friend with a couch. I smiled back and shrugged, trying to play it cool. It's no big deal. But honestly, it was kind of a big deal. Things got interesting one Saturday morning. I had planned to spend the day catching up on work, but Jamie was in full let's do something mode. He dragged me out of bed with some ridiculous pep talk about how we needed to stop wasting our weekends being bored adults. Before I knew it, we were downtown at this little art gallery he'd found, browsing paintings and sculptures. I'm not usually into that stuff, but I wanted to see what made him tick. He was so animated, explaining the stories behind each piece, how the colors spoke to him, or the textures reminded him of his childhood. You could tell he saw the world in a way most people don't. It was refreshing, honestly. After that, we grabbed coffee at this tiny cafe that smelled like cinnamon and old books. Over steaming mugs, Jamie got real for the first time about his past. How his last relationship ended badly, and how he'd been kind of drifting since then. I felt this pang of sympathy mixed with something else I couldn't quite name. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before?" I asked. He shrugged, looking a little embarrassed. "I guess I didn't want you to see me as some sad guy. Plus, I'm used to keeping my guard up." That struck a chord. I knew what it was like to live behind walls, to be cautious about who you trust. So I reached across the table and gave his hand a quick squeeze, not knowing if that was too much or just right. Jamie leaned in and gave me a shy smile, and for once, the air between us felt charged with something real. Back at my apartment later that day, things shifted too. We were cooking dinner together. Well, Jamie was cooking, and I was the official taste tester, and somehow the conversation turned to what we both wanted out of life. He said he wasn't sure yet, but wanted to find something stable, maybe even a relationship. I froze for a second because, honestly, I hadn't thought about that with him before. I mean, I liked him, more than a friend should, I guess, but I hadn't dared to imagine what might come next. I told him as much, fumbling over my words, trying to sound casual. "Yeah," he said softly. "I thought maybe you might feel the same." The way he said it made my heart race. I looked at him, this guy who had been crashing at my place and accidentally taking up residence in my life, and realized I didn't want him to leave. Not just my bed or apartment, but my life in general. That night, Jamie stayed over like usual, but this time, when he rolled over in my bed, I reached out and held his hand. It was a small gesture, but it changed everything. We didn't say much after that. Words felt unnecessary, but the silence was warm and full of promise. Of course, it wasn't all smooth sailing. The next morning, reality crept back in with a vengeance. Jamie's freelance gigs meant he sometimes disappeared for days without warning, and my work schedule was hectic. We were figuring out how to blend two very different lives into one space, which came with its fair share of missteps. Like the time he accidentally used my favorite coffee mug to paint with and left it stained, or when I forgot to pick him up after a late client meeting and left him stranded. But each mishap just brought us closer, forcing us to communicate better and laugh more. We learned each other's quirks, the way Jamie obsessively folds his clothes, or how I can't fall asleep without the fan on. We started making plans that didn't revolve around just existing together, but actually living together. One evening, a few weeks later, Jamie surprised me by cooking an entire dinner from scratch. It was messy, with sauce splattered on the counters and a slightly burnt dessert. But sitting there eating in my tiny kitchen, I realized I didn't want this to be temporary anymore. I wanted a future with this guy who once just borrowed my bed and now owned a piece of my heart. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, Jamie's still here, sprawled out on my couch after a long day, and I'm sitting here thinking about how something that started as a simple favor has turned into the most complicated and wonderful part of my life. And honestly, I'm scared. Scared that if I let myself hope too much, it might all fall apart. But also, maybe that's what makes it worth it. Because sometimes the biggest risks lead to the best stories. And maybe, just maybe, this is ours. There was this night, one of those nights where everything just felt off. Jamie and I had been together in my apartment for a few months by then, though we'd never really put a label on what together meant. It was one of those undefined zones that felt safe but sometimes left me second-guessing stuff. We'd had a small argument earlier. Nothing major, just the usual friction of two people learning to coexist in close quarters. Something about dirty dishes left in the sink and how I'd accidentally erased his playlist on the stereo. Stupid things, really, but even the smallest issues can feel magnified when you care about someone. That evening, after the tension simmered down, Jamie was unusually quiet. He was sitting on the edge of my bed, scrolling through his phone, and I remember watching him out of the corner of my eye, trying to figure out what was going on behind those slightly furrowed brows. "Hey," I finally said, sitting beside him. "You're really quiet tonight. Everything okay?" He looked up, caught me staring, and gave a half smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just tired. Work's been a mess lately." I nodded, wanting to believe him but feeling this gnawing sensation that there was more beneath the surface. Jamie wasn't the guy to dump his stress on people easily, especially not on me, but I wanted to be that someone. So I said, trying to keep my tone light, "Do you want to go out this weekend? Maybe get some fresh air, hit that new taco place you mentioned?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know. I'm probably just going to stay in, finish some projects." I bit my lip, not wanting to push but also not wanting him to retreat entirely. "You sure? You've been cooped up for days." He shook his head, then paused. "Look, Jake, can I be honest with you?" "Always," I said, hoping I sounded as open as I felt. Jamie took a deep breath. "I'm scared. About this. About us. About what it means to have someone in my life, permanently." That hit me like a punch in the gut, because, honestly, I was scared too, but hearing it laid out so plainly made it real. "What's scaring you?" I asked softly. He shrugged, eyes downcast. "I've been burned before. Relationships, friendships. Sometimes it feels like I just end up alone anyway. So I'm scared I'll screw this up, or that you'll get tired of me." I reached out and took his hand, squeezing it gently. "Janie, no one's perfect. We're both figuring this out, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." He looked up then, a flicker of something hopeful in his gaze. "You mean that?" I nodded. "Yeah, I do." That night, we talked for hours, about fears, about hopes, about the messy middle ground between being single and being in something real. It was the first time we'd really opened up like that, and it changed everything. The walls between us started coming down, brick by brick. In the weeks that followed, we slipped into a rhythm that felt less like accidental roommates and more like partners. We woke up together, shared lazy Sunday mornings with coffee and bad TV, and slowly began weaving our lives into each other's routines. Jamie started leaving his laptop on the dining table instead of shoving it in his bag when he left, and I found myself texting him just to check in during the day. One evening, I came home earlier than usual and found him on the couch, headphones on, sketching something in his notebook. I sat beside him, watching the way his pencil moved, the focus in his eyes. When he noticed me, he smiled and showed me the drawing, a rough idea for a poster he was designing. "It's good," I said, genuinely impressed. He shrugged modestly. "Thanks. I'm thinking about pitching it to a client tomorrow." I nodded, feeling proud of him. "You've come a long way since that first night you crashed here." Jamie laughed softly. "Yeah, I guess I did." That night, as I lay in bed, I realized that Jamie wasn't just borrowing my bed anymore. He'd become a part of my life in a way I hadn't expected, but couldn't imagine living without. But just as things were settling into this comfortable groove, life threw a curveball. It happened out of nowhere. Jamie got offered a job in another city, a big opportunity, the kind he'd been chasing forever. It was exciting but complicated, especially for something that was still so new between us. When he told me, I could see the conflict in his eyes, the mix of excitement and hesitation. "What do you want to do?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He looked down, fiddling with the hem of his shirt. "I don't know. I want this job, but I don't want to leave you." I swallowed hard. "We'll figure it out," I said, though I wasn't sure how. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every moment we'd shared, wondering how it all had gone from a stranger borrowing my bed to someone I actually wanted in my life. How the hell that had happened so fast. The next morning, Jamie was quiet when I woke up. We didn't talk about the job right away, but the weight of it hung between us. It was like this invisible line, stretching and pulling at the edges of what we'd built. Over the next few days, we talked more and more, weighing the possibilities. Long distance, moving together, taking a leap of faith. It was scary, the kind of scary that makes you question everything you thought you knew about yourself. One afternoon, as we sat on my balcony watching the city, Jamie reached out and took my hand. "No matter what happens, I'm glad I stayed," he said quietly. I smiled, squeezing his hand back. "Me too." We didn't have the answers yet. But maybe that was okay. Maybe, just maybe, this was another beginning. The kind you didn't see coming, but you hoped for anyway. The days after Jamie told me about the job offer felt like walking on a tightrope. Every conversation we had was laced with this unspoken question hanging in the air. What now? It wasn't the kind of stuff you just text about or joke around with. It required more honesty, more vulnerability. And honestly, that scared me. We tried to keep things normal for a while, cooking dinner together, binging weird Netflix shows, making plans for the weekend. But there was this subtle undercurrent of tension, like both of us were waiting for the other to say something that would break the fragile calm. One evening, I caught Jamie staring out the window, his face lit by the glow of streetlights and passing cars. I sat down beside him on the couch, careful not to startle him. "You okay?" I asked gently. He sighed, rubbing his hands together. "I don't know. I'm trying to imagine what life would look like if I take the job. New city, new everything. And you're right here." I nodded, feeling the weight of it. "It's a big change." "Yeah," he said, voice low. "And I'm scared I'll mess it up. Not just the job, but us." I reached out and took his hand in mine. "I'm scared too. But maybe that's the point. If it's worth it, we figure it out together." He looked at me then, eyes searching, and I swear I saw a flicker of hope. The next few days were filled with late-night talks and endless what-if scenarios. We talked about everything. How long distance might work or not, if one of us should move, how we'd keep the connection alive despite the miles. There was this moment one night when we were lying in bed, the city noises humming softly outside the window. Jamie turned to me, his expression serious. "Jake, do you think this could work? Even if I'm not here every day?" I thought about it. About how much he'd become a part of my life, how empty the apartment felt when he was away, even for a few hours. "I want to believe it can," I said honestly. "But only if we're both all in." He nodded. "Me too." Then came the day Jamie was supposed to leave for the job interview trip, a few days away in the city where the job was. I drove him to the airport, the car ride a quiet mix of nervous energy and forced small talk. When we reached the terminal, neither of us wanted to be the one to say goodbye first. "Promise me something?" Jamie asked as we stood near the gate. "Anything. Keep a little space in your heart for me, no matter what happens." I smiled, even though my chest felt tight. "Always." He leaned in and kissed me, soft, lingering, the kind of kiss that says, "I care about you," without any words. Watching him walk away, suitcase in hand, I felt this weird mix of pride and panic. I wanted him to chase his dreams, but selfishly, I wished he could just stay. The days he was away were tougher than I expected. I found myself checking my phone every few minutes, hoping for a text or call. When Jamie finally did call, hearing his voice was like a lifeline. "Hey," he said, a little breathless. "The interview went well." I smiled despite myself. "That's great. I'm proud of you." We talked for a while about the city, the job, the small details of his trip. But beneath the surface, I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. A week later, Jamie got the offer. It was real. The opportunity was his if he wanted it. That night, we met up at our favorite little bar downtown to celebrate. Sort of. The mood was light, But every now and then I caught Jamie staring off into the distance, lost in thought. "So," I said finally, swirling the last of my drink, "what now?" He sighed, setting his glass down. "I want to take the job, but I don't want to lose what we have." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Then, let's figure this out together." He smiled, relief flooding his face. "You make this a lot easier." The following weeks were a whirlwind of packing, planning, and emotional roller coasters. Jamie was moving, no doubt about it, but we agreed on one thing. We'd try long distance for a while, see where it took us. Our first week apart was brutal. The apartment felt emptier than ever, silence echoing where his laughter used to be. I kept busy with work and friends, but late at night, I'd find myself scrolling through old messages, pictures we'd taken together, craving the warmth of his presence. One night, as I was about to call him, my phone buzzed with a text. "Miss you." It was simple, but it hit me right in the chest. I replied, "Miss you more." Over the next few months, we made it work. Video calls that stretched into the early hours, surprise visits when schedules aligned, and constant check-ins that kept the connection alive. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt and frustration, days when the distance felt unbearable. But through it all, I realized something important. Love isn't about perfect timing or grand gestures. Sometimes, it's about showing up, even when it's hard. About finding ways to bridge the gap no matter how far apart you are. One chilly evening, Jamie surprised me by showing up at my doorstep, suitcase in tow, grinning like a kid on Christmas morning. "Thought I'd see how much you really miss me," he joked. I pulled him inside, heart pounding. More than I can say. That night, as we lay tangled in my bed, the same bed he'd borrowed so many months ago, I knew this wasn't just a fling or a convenience. Jamie had become home. And maybe that's the thing I learned from all this. Sometimes, the people who crash into your life unexpectedly are the ones who end up staying. Not just borrowing your bed, but your heart too. Jamie's surprise visit was the kind of thing you dream about, but don't really expect to happen in real life. There he was, standing in my doorway, looking travel-worn but grinning like he'd just won the lottery. I hadn't seen him in weeks, and the apartment immediately felt alive again, like it had been holding its breath until he got back. We didn't say much at first, just held each other close, like making up for lost time without words. Then he flopped down on the couch, rubbing his neck. "Man, I forgot how much I missed this place. And you." I laughed, shaking my head. "You sound like you've been away forever." "Feels like it," he admitted. "City life is exciting, but exhausting. I'm glad to be home, even if it's just for a little while." That weekend was one of those rare, perfect bubbles. We went for long walks, grabbed greasy pizza at our go-to hole-in-the-wall joint, and stayed up late talking about everything and nothing. It was easy, the way things used to be before the distance, before the uncertainty. But then, on Sunday night, things got real. We were sitting on my bed, Jamie's head resting on my shoulder while I scrolled through my phone, when his expression shifted. He sat up, looked me in the eye, and said, "Jake, I've been thinking." I put my phone down, giving him my full attention. "I love this," he gestured around the room. "Us. But I'm tired of the back and forth, the hopping between cities. I want to stop renting time and start living it." I swallowed hard, my heart beating faster. Was he about to say what I thought he was? "I want to move back here," he said, voice steady but hopeful. "I want to build something real with you." For a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared at him, trying to wrap my head around the idea that the guy who once borrowed my bed was now asking to share my life. "That's amazing," I finally said, smiling so big I thought my face would hurt. "I want that too." The weeks that followed were a mix of excitement and chaos. Jamie found a local gig, a design studio with a vibe that suited him, and started packing up his life in the other city. We spent every spare moment planning how to merge our worlds. Furniture, bills, routines, quirks. But merging lives isn't as simple as moving boxes. There were moments when we bumped up against differences we hadn't noticed before. The way Jamie likes his mornings quiet and I'm a noisy breakfast person, or how I keep my things meticulously organized while he's more of a creative mess. One night, after a minor spat about whose turn it was to do the dishes, Jamie looked exhausted and said, "Maybe we're rushing this." I sighed, running a hand through my hair. "Maybe we are, but I don't want to give up." He looked at me, eyes soft. "Neither do I. We're just learning. Together." That was the moment I realized relationships aren't about perfection. They're about patience and effort. About choosing each other, even when it's messy. Living together brought new challenges, but also new joys. We started cooking meals together in my tiny kitchen, laughing over burnt toast and failed recipes. Saturday mornings became our sacred time for lazy brunches and newspaper reading. Jamie introduced me to his favorite indie bands, and I showed him the best spots for late-night tacos. One night, after a particularly rough day at work, Jamie came home to find me sprawled on the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. He sat down beside me and pulled me close. "Bad day?" "Yeah," I admitted. "Just feels like everything's piling up." He hugged me tighter. "We'll get through it. Together." That simple promise meant more than words could say. Months passed, and the apartment started to feel like ours. Not just mine with a guest, but a home we built side by side. Jamie's clothes mingled with mine in the closet. His art prints hung on the walls. Our routines intertwined until it was hard to tell where one of us ended and the other began. And then, one night, after dinner and a bottle of wine, Jamie reached over, took my hand, and said, "Jake, I've been thinking, maybe it's time to stop borrowing your bed and start calling it ours." My heart raced. "What are you saying?" He smiled, eyes shining with that familiar mix of mischief and sincerity. "I want us to make this official. Not just roommates, not just us. I want to be your boyfriend." I laughed, shaking my head in disbelief. "You've been my boyfriend for a while now. You just didn't know it." He leaned in and kissed me, slow and sure. Well, I'm ready to say it out loud. In that moment, lying there with his hand in mine, I realized how far we'd come. From a stranger borrowing my bed to the guy the first wanted to share my life with. It wasn't perfect. It was real and messy and beautiful in its own imperfect way. And honestly, I wouldn't have it any other way. A few weeks after that night, Jamie and I sat on the couch, surrounded by the quiet comfort of our shared apartment. The glow from the lamp cast soft shadows, and for the first time, it really felt like home. Not just a space I lived in, but a place we'd built together. We'd come a long way from those first nights when he borrowed my bed without any real plan. Now his toothbrush was permanently on the sink, his favorite mug in the cabinet, and his laugh filled the rooms in a way that made me smile just hearing it. It was those small, ordinary things that made me realize how much he'd become part of my life, not as a guest, but as someone who belonged. That evening, Jamie caught me staring at him while he was scrolling through his phone. He raised an eyebrow, grinning. "Something on your mind?" he teased. I smiled back, feeling warm and certain. Just thinking about how strange it is, how I went from being annoyed that you kept crashing here to not wanting you anywhere else. He laughed softly, leaning into my side. "Yeah, I was worried you'd get sick of me. Trust me, if I had, you'd know by now," I said, squeezing his hand. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the kind that only comes after sharing a lot, good, bad, and everything in between. It wasn't dramatic or flashy. It was simple, honest, and real. And that's what made it special. "I'm glad you stopped leaving," I finally said, my voice low. Jamie looked up, eyes soft. "Me too. I was scared at first, but now, I can't imagine not being here." I pulled him closer, resting my head on his shoulder. "Neither can I." In that moment, the uncertainty and fear that had once lurked in the background faded away. What we had wasn't perfect, and life would throw challenges our way, but we'd chosen each other, day after day. Sometimes love sneaks in quietly, not with fireworks or grand declarations, but through lingering touches, shared laughter, and the comfort of knowing someone's there when you wake up and when you fall asleep. Jamie had started as a stranger borrowing my bed, but he became so much more. He became home. And for me, that was everything.